switch it and never land.
That bar will never land.
I got a ready plan.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts, yo, we came to win.
Out the blocks like a world-class runner.
Every day working spring, fall, winter, summer.
Blowing up like we supposed to.
Got those cause we go shows and promotion. And now we don't know us. But the fame and fortune might pass.
What's more important to me is that I'm having a blast.
On my own destiny in the palm of my hands.
Got a pen, paper, headphones, and then it's like
I let the music take over, and when it takes over, the game is all rolled up.
Good evening, and welcome to the Objective Opinion Talk Show. Finally, we have brought down the best in Brooklyn to actually respond to your requests. So, we have the dynasty before us today. That would be Yvette Clarke, Miss Walker, and Alika. And I gotta assure you that this is one episode that you don't want to miss. But see, I could sit here for hours and talk to you guys about their legacy and what they have done thus far. But we're going to start with the first person that made that a reality, and that would be Yvette Clarke. Yvette Clarke is the United States Congresswoman, and she got that way from her mother. Now, you need to go back and understand how it came down the pipeline with her mother guiding her to public office, and she in turn guided two other individuals to public office, which makes this a dynasty. And now all three of them hold three different branches of government. And we need to know how those government branches will affect us and how it can assist us in the future. So I'm going to let Yvette Clarke explain to you exactly what her district does and what she does, and what it's going to take us to the next level in this struggle. Mr. Clarke, talk to the people, please.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me, James. This is great, and it's wonderful to be here with my colleagues, my sisters in the struggle, Assemblywoman Latrice Walker and Councilwoman Alika Ampry-Samuels. You know, this is a call to service, and I have been in office now in the United States Congress for 12 years. I just started my 13th year. Elected to this constituency, which is the 9th Congressional District of Brooklyn. The district covers many communities, but it's all in the borough of Brooklyn. So I start at the Barclay Center on Atlantic Avenue and run south all the way out to Emmons Avenue in Sheepshead Bay. On the west side, I start at 6th Avenue and Park Slope, and then I run, on the east side over into Brownsville. So I have all of the communities in between, one of the most diverse constituencies in the United States. I boast about it all the time in Washington, D.C., because it's such an honor to represent, you know, the communities that I was born and raised in. And as you stated, I initially started my service succeeding my mother, the Honorable Dr. Una Clarke, in the New York City Council. But even prior to that, I had started out in the nonprofit community world, working with grassroots organizing in our communities with tenants associations at the Erasmus Neighborhood Federation. I worked then in the Bronx with the Bronx Empowerment Zone, where I was the director of that program. But I knew that we had to change policy in order to really have an impact on community, on families. And so when the opportunity came for me to seek elective office, I decided to really take that opportunity to be a voice for my people and to craft policy that would open up pathways and corridors for their success in the way that sort of our predecessors, the elected officials before me, did for me and for these women here. So the work that we have to do in Washington, D.C. has to do with the federal government. And oftentimes people don't make the distinction between the Washington, D.C., the federal government, Albany, the state government, and City Hall, right, in New York City, Manhattan. What we do at the federal level is we have the United States House of Representatives and we have the U.S. Senate. We are one distinct branch of government unto ourselves. We interface with the White House, the executive branch, the presidency of the United States, and oftentimes also we're pushing for decisions to come from the Supreme Court, which ultimately rules on whether in fact what we do is constitutional. So the federal government plays a very important role in the lives of the people that I represent, a massive role in governing how we move about, how we seek education and opportunity, how we become U.S. citizens. All of that is determined in Washington, D.C. And I think for the purposes of this discussion today, and given that we're in the 26th day of a federal government shutdown, my role, I think, can be distinguished as one where I have to be a fighter, one where I have to build common cause with my colleagues to liberate people, quite frankly. And that's what we're engaged in right now. I believe it's a liberation struggle, that our humanity is being challenged. And as generations did before us, we cannot shy away from this. We cannot act as though, oh, everything will be okay, or it won't. We have to make it so. And so I'm glad to be on your program to have this conversation today, James.
With that being said, now we have been fighting the housing crisis for 24 years now.
More than 24 years.
No, I'm going to the 24 years because what you see before us now is this just catching up to how it's pushing a lot of people out of their homes. We have 150,000 rent-stabilized units being removed in the last 10 years. That's a large number in the city of New York alone. And I'm not talking about other cities. So when you start talking about you're a part of the federal government and you deal with HUB, and now they're cutting the funding off from HUB in its entirety until the shutdown is removed, where does that leave your constituents?
Well, it leaves all of us really in crisis because the federal government had been one of the major sources of resources for housing development. Hence the name of the agency, the Housing and Urban Development Agency. And they have also historically been a major resource provider for our public housing stock. Well, for generations now, they've been divesting. And we have not made the type of commitment to, as I've stated in Washington, D.C., domiciling our people. We've watched our communities get displaced, the cost of living increase, yet the opportunity for generating more income, for a decent cost of living increase for those who are working hard each and every day trying to make ends meet, has not occurred under successive presidents. And so we have an obligation and responsibility right now to make those investments. We know that this crisis can't get any deeper for our people. And watching our homes going under in foreclosure, watching the rents escalating as new developments go up around us, as people come from around the world and across the nation to Brooklyn as a destination for a place for them to live, again increasing the cost of living in communities that had at one point in time been working class, been black communities. We have a lot of challenges before us, but I believe that right now in this climate of activism, this is the time when we can actually get a breakthrough. And it means that we have to not just see our elected officials as going to Washington to do a job, but having the support and the groundswell in our communities, activists out there demanding this, will make all the difference in the world.
Now, with that being said, that means you are now informed from your elected officials directly that you should be more involved in what's going on in your immediate community by coming to speak with your elected officials first and foremost, and then by also going out there and making sure you stand alongside them to make sure that becomes a reality. This crowd getting tighter and tighter. Oh, I've got the young brothers here again, huh? Okay, boy, let me back away for a minute. Wait. Ah!
They're surveying all New Yorkers, and one of the issues is in regards to police reform. And so I urge all of you to either go to Canal and Barrett or
to the homeless, and we had a conversation about community land trusts, which are a really excellent and flexible model for creating housing that's permanently affordable, that takes land and housing out of the speculative market and creates community and tenant-controlled housing. But it's a really complex model that I'm not even going to try to explain, but I'm going to say that we have some excellent full-color materials over at our table. Somebody hold up the materials and say how much fun they are. So folks should check out this table to see a little bit more about the work that we're doing. Not only did we talk about the great importance of this model, but also the work that the New York City Community Land Initiative is doing, which is an alliance of a lot of different groups in New York City who are trying to create not only a East Harlem Community Land Trust pilot project, but change policies and legislation citywide to see a lot more housing that's created that's actually controlled by the communities that live there.
Let me begin by acknowledging the fact that I appreciate you having this conversation with 3 different levels of government. And quite honestly, from a state perspective, while we do provide some tax credits for some of the affordable housing that's built, the state doesn't necessarily have the jurisdiction over Housing Connect. It's a city system that is very troublesome in navigating. There are many rules and regulations that disqualify so many people from actually gaining access to the housing that is available, whether you believe it's affordable or not. But notwithstanding that, one of the things that we've seen throughout our state, when I initially was elected, I was elected in 2014. And one of the first things that we did while I was in Albany was vacancy rent regulation. And I knew that I was born and raised in public housing. So the conversation about rent regulation wasn't necessarily something that was sort of personal for me, because we had the protections of tenant laws through public housing, which is very important, and it provides a very great service to the individuals who are living there. But I didn't realize just how unstable the rent and tenant protections are at the state level, and really how based on politics this conversation really is. We're noticing that there are rents that are happening at astronomical rates, where, even in some of the communities where most people would never want to go, for instance, people would always say about Brownsville, I don't want to move to Brownsville, right? And, but we recognize now that it's probably one of the most affordable locations for most people to live, or at once was, because so many apartments across our state and across our city are going for $2,000 and $3,000 a month.
Yes, now.
And we had certain protections in terms of rent increases in the state that we sort of lost, and that's how we got to the point where we were able to lose $150,000, 150,000 apartments off of rent regulation rolls. For instance, in some apartments, when you get to a certain amount of money, these sort of vacancy bonuses, if you will, and a landlord was charging, let's say, $2,000 a month for rent, which is already expensive. And he goes in and he does these, they call MCIs, major capital improvements. He may do some things down in the basement, put in a new boiler, do something on the roof, and now he's able to charge, let's say, $2,500 a month for that apartment. And he has to apply to the state in order to get the approval, in order to do the improvements, and also to get this extra rent. And then there's something called IAIs, the individual apartment improvements. So he goes in and he does, put in a dishwasher, bath fitter in the bathroom, and maybe a new refrigerator. And now he's able to charge, let's say, another $200, which brings the rent to $2,700. At this point in time, the apartment, which was once a rent-regulated apartment, which has certain protections with respect to succession rights, with respect to the rate of increases as it relates to leases from one year to the next, you no longer have those protections, because once an apartment hits $2,700, it comes out of rent regulation totally. And this is what we've been seeing happen across our city. And it's been problematic for many different levels, because when you once these apartments come off the it goes into the market, right? So now we're seeing apartments which may have been $2,700 going for $3,000 or even more in communities such as Brownsville and even Ocean Hill, Brownsville, where I know and love. And it was someplace that, you know, we stuck it out. And we want to be able to enjoy the same prosperities all across the city like everyone else gets to enjoy. And but our home is becoming less and less affordable even to us. And so it's important that once our rent regulation laws come up again, which we are having these conversations now, that people do remain, as the Congresswoman said, laser focused, and make sure that they understand that democracy is a verb, and you have to be heard in this conversation, and you have to let your experiences be known. One of the most, I guess, important roles that I play as an assembly member is about my constituent services. And most of the constituent services that we see are about housing. There are more people who are living in transitional housing or homeless shelters than we are filling our permanent housing stock. And why is that the case? Because part of some of the ways that we have been designing our budget cycle is it's much easier to get resources to build a homeless shelter than it is to build permanent housing. And when you build permanent housing, when you're building the homeless shelters, people are able to get $2,000 a month for a family living in one room, as opposed to having to utilize all of this real estate for building out actual homes, right? And so we're creating a space now where instead of people wanting to even build housing, they're taking the shortcut and saying, let me go out and build these homeless shelters, because A, I don't have to go through a ULURP process in many instances, and B, I don't have to deal with all of the sort of rigmarole that tenants would have something to say, and then elected officials got something on it, and the housing groups got something on it. And in addition to that, one of the other circumstances that I've seen coming out of Albany with respect to housing is, again, where we're putting our resources with housing. Supportive housing. If you want to build permanent affordable housing, which is just mainstream and generic for most individuals, it's probably one of the hardest roads. But if you want to build supportive housing, resources are sort of flowing a lot more easily. And generally how that sort of translates into reality is it'll be housing that may be placed within a NYCHA development, as we're seeing some of these RAD deals and other deals that are going through on NYCHA grounds, where there's already some problematic scenarios that are taking place. And then they're putting people who may have a troubling background, whether it's transitioning from the criminal justice system, whether it's recovering from a lifestyle of drug abuse, and of course mental health. They love to lump all of these other sort of societal issues into this mantra of mental health, right? And but it's just real people living real life experiences. But it makes it easier when you say mental health, because that's where you can get the supportive services needs. Now, granted, mental health issues are very important, because we always have to make sure that we're providing a space for that as well, and for individuals to live holistic lives. We can't just act like that doesn't exist, and it's important for us to build those houses. And so what I've been seeing is that many families who are in homeless shelters, because the availability is more readily available for supportive housing scenarios, they try to fit their families into that box in order to get into these supportive housing scenarios, as opposed to just being able to apply for regular housing on Housing Connect. So the system of displacement, or the system of poverty, or a system of identifying with certain groups, which sometimes may not necessarily be in your best interest, just sort of gets permeated a lot more deeply within many pockets of our communities. So on the one end, you have apartments that were once affordable, that everyone had access to, are now becoming market rate apartments that no one can afford, and the apartments that are available are available with a certain lens lent to it, that again so many of our regular everyday individuals don't have access to be able to gain an entry point for permanent, real affordable housing. So it's a real serious issue, and we're working very hard. I know we've just had this Vital Brooklyn scenario which came through.
Yeah, I seen it.
Now let me
Vital Brooklyn a little bit later.
Let me just say though, with Vital Brooklyn, and it really, and this is the part about Vital Brooklyn that I love so much, is that Vital Brooklyn really came as a federal initiative.
Yes, it did.
And it was because New York State had owed the federal government something to the tune of $7 billion. Wow. I mean, $10 billion. But ultimately, they were able to get this waiver of about $7 billion. Okay. And then once those resources got to the state, it's directed at, particular communities across central Brooklyn. But from that scenario, we're all able to build affordable housing, real affordable housing within our communities. Mm-hmm. And of course, I was a staffer to Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. Yes. And I'm sure this will kind of be a very good sort of headway into our councilwoman here. Yes. But Alika and I both grew up together in Brownsville. And I remember her really being the one who was really interested in politics. Mm-hmm. And I always had these big dreams. I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be a lawyer, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. And that's all I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I am a lawyer, but I decided to do entertainment law. Mm-hmm. But as we were studying for the bar, Alika would say, I'm running for city council, and I'm like, okay, well, we're out here doing this. Okay. And I was like, Alika, this politics stuff, this is for the birds. I can't imagine. She's like running to all the community boards, running to every place. And I remember saying to her, well, Alika, there's this congresswoman who represents our community, and she's running in our area, and we can talk about Prospect Plaza later. But it was just amazing. And so Alika's like, well, I know her. Her name's Yvette Clarke. And so we both sort of was just like, okay, well, this is a great opportunity. She sort of talked me into it as I was like, I really want to go and work with her. And so, I started work. So I was working at a law firm who was working with the congresswoman, and really recognized that, sometimes you have to be able to see things to believe that you could be that, right? And because I would see her, and being a black woman, I didn't really have too many role models to look up to of black women in politics. But she was my one, and then she was beautiful and friendly and accessible and approachable. And I was, and it was just brand new for me, that I felt like, this could definitely be something I could see myself doing. I could see myself becoming, as we know, we're just all coming off of reading First Lady Michelle Obama's book, Becoming. We're all always becoming. And so I jumped out there and into the water, and really recognized that I was a fish, and really just, swam my way through. And now we have our wonderful council member, and that's just sort of how we're all, disconnected.
You're doing just fine. But one more question before we leave from you.
Okay.
So, knowing all of this, how do you plan to actually change the problem with the housing scenario as far as the laws are concerned? How do you plan to bring that to actually addressing those immediate concerns with the violations in the laws that you see?
Well, presently, so part of what we talked about is how sometimes government becomes very transactional. And one of the things that we had seen in the past are there were some policy issues that the Assembly Democrats really, really, really wanted, and we were stopping at nothing by which to get it. For instance, like raise the age, and then of course the Senate, which was controlled by Republicans, though it was a Democratic majority. Was really pushing the needs and the wants that they had with respect to the rent laws. And now we have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic Assembly and a Democratic governor. And we believe that the outcome this time around would be more pro-tenant, But of course, you know, I say to everyone that Democrats are not a monolithic body. And just because, you know, everyone, you know, are Democrats, we'll see that, you know, some may be more conservative and others may not necessarily be the case. But I'm hopeful that we're really going to have a successful year with respect to housing, because we started it with a blast, doing, you know, voting reforms that, you know, had not been done in a ever. Right?
Absolutely.
Early voting here in New York State.
Yes, yes.
I mean, that's humongous.
That's huge.
Take your bitch, watch me switch it and never land. That ball will never land. I got a ready plan. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, yo, we came to win. Out the blocks like a world-class runner. Every day working spring, fall, winter, summer. Blowing up like we supposed to. Got jokes cause we go. Shows and promotion. Now we gon' know us.
But the fame and fortune might pass.
What's more important to me is that I'm having a blast.
On my own destiny in the palm of my hands.
Got a pen, paper, headphones, and in this flight.
I let the music take over, and when it takes over,